knowledge should be free. And our mission at MIT is to advance knowledge around the world. What if we use the internet to basically give this stuff away? It sounds so simple at the time.
OpenCourseWare is a lot like visiting the Grand Canyon. It's vast and it's very much choose your own adventure. There's something in the air at MIT and in the interwebs on MIT OpenCourseWare that is truly contagious. Now I really honestly believe I can get into programming. I could even attack quantum physics if I wanted to. There is just something about MIT that makes you believe you can.
Welcome back, everyone, to Go for Launch. Today, we're joined by Sarah Hansen and Curt Newton from MIT OpenCourseWare. Sarah hosts the podcast Chalk Radio, and Curt is the director of MIT's OpenCourseWare. So Sarah and Curt, welcome. And could we start off by having you introduce yourselves, talk about your background, and tell us about your affiliation with MIT?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Audrey. We're really, really glad to be here. As director of OpenCourseWare, I've worked with this program, which is over 20 years old. I just celebrated my 21st anniversary here. I was in the right place at the right time when this fascinating program was launched, and I've just been thrilled to participate in this, this project that has changed so many people's lives around the world, sharing knowledge freely. And I get to support this amazing team that I get to work with, especially including Sarah here.
Thanks, Curt. Yep, my name is Sarah Hansen, and I lead Open Education Innovation at MIT OpenCourseWare. And I'm really interested in getting open educational resources into the hands of educators and learners who do really powerful, life-changing things with them.
That sounds really cool, and I'm excited to get to learn a little bit more about that throughout today's episode. And we just touched on it a little bit, but do you mind telling us more about what MIT OpenCourseWare is and how it's making education more accessible to people around the world?
I'll jump in with the start. As director of OpenCourseWare, I talk about this a lot. One way to think of it is this massive library of freely shared materials that anyone can learn from in a self-paced, self-directed way. The materials are largely drawn from what is taught at MIT in the classroom, but also things that are drawn more broadly from kind of the overall educational experience there. And these materials are posted on the OpenCourseWare website at ocw.mit.edu. All of our videos are also on a very popular and powerful channel on our YouTube. And we also share these materials through other forms, such as the Chalk Radio podcast and social media and such. And just, the last thing I'll say by sort of overall description is, in addition to materials that are mostly created by the instructors at MIT, we also, invite students and learners from MIT to be sharing their materials as well, because it's a really amazing, vibrant learning space that happens at MIT. And we want to bring that to life for people as well. So you might find, for courses that have a big project component, students who are sharing their project work along with the faculty, sharing their, how they taught the course. Yeah. Sarah, please expand.
Well, I think that's a really good description. And my role is to share how MIT faculty teach, which I do that with a team. We interview faculty after they teach a course on the MIT campus, and we have them publish that information along with their course materials on the website. So people can really get a feel for the people behind the materials that we share.
I like that. And it's not just, content posted online that people click around, but having a little bit more insight into who's creating that content, where that material is coming from. And something I think is interesting that you mentioned in your introduction, Curt, is that you've been with MIT OpenCourseWare for 20 years. I'm wondering if, was MIT OpenCourseWare like a pioneer in this space? I know that online education has become a lot more common, especially since the pandemic with remote learning. But is this something that's, I guess, existed for a while? What do you know what the drive was to get this online in the first place?
Yeah. If we can, cast our mind back or dig back into the history, what was going on around the year 2000, right? The internet was still a pretty fresh thing, and people were trying to figure out what it could be, what what could be done with it. Yeah, the human curated, Yahoo was like one of the most popular search tools. There was no YouTube, there were no mobile phones, right? And like most big schools, um, MIT was trying to figure out what to do with the internet. Should we create an MIT.com, for instance, that people could, go to and like sign up for courses, and get like full like online education. And they, this task force looked at it really hard. They did like a business case and they said, this doesn't feel like true to the mission of MIT. It feels like it would be kind of a diversion and there's so much chaos, right? There was a lot of startup bursts at that era, right? People tried stuff and it kind of fell apart. But MIT also being part of the sort of origin, one of the starting points for the open source software movement, people said, what if we kind of tap into some of these more foundational motivations, right?
Hmm.
To just like knowledge should be free. And our mission at MIT is to like advance knowledge around the world. What if we use the internet to basically give this stuff away? It sounds so simple at the time.
Yeah.
But it's like people are thinking, what's the catch? Really? Are you actually going to do this? Will this cheapen the MIT education, whatnot? It was really a kind of a fabulous leap of faith from our president at the time, Charles Vest, and the key faculty to make that leap. Um, and so we were like the first big school to embark on this. Um, and the initial mission had two parts. One was to share all this MIT material free with the world, but the second was to like build a movement. And so
Hmm.
very quickly we were joined by literally hundreds of other institutions around the world who wanted to start experimenting with this. And now 20 years later, we kind of look back and we can see what an incredible, vibrant, diverse ecosystem of people doing different things with that basic foundational drive to like give people, free open access to knowledge to empower their lives. So yeah, just to like cap it off. Yeah, MIT OpenCourseWare was like the first big mover, but we
Hmm.
have been thrilled to, as you might say, give market share away to all of these
Yeah.
other people who've come in and done amazing things with it.
Yeah, it's cool to hear where it started from and to see how it's expanded to where we're at today.
Yeah. And I mean, Sarah, you've been working with, in particular, educators and all the different things that people are doing with these things, um, and what comes to mind for you there, if I could ask? Yeah.
I think just all the creative things that people are doing around adaptation. So they find openly licensed materials and then they are able, because of the provisions under the license, to make them more culturally relevant for their students, make them more relevant to the locales in which their schools are situated. And it's just really powerful to see the impact that it can have on learners when we've fully leveraged the power of open education.
Yeah, that's really inspiring, and I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
When it comes to the courses that MIT OpenCourseWare offers, what are some of the STEM courses or programs that excite you and that you think our audience should be aware of?
Yeah. Um, well, MIT is definitely a STEM heavy place. Um, and certainly, you know, most of our most popular, most used content comes from STEM fields. It's the introductory or first year, you know, calculus, differential equations, math, science, biology, chemistry, physics, and computer science and programming, especially in the past decade, that's growing even more important. Those are, you know, those are the typical entry points. Um, but I would also, I'd want to highlight, all of the things that sort of stretch the bounds of what STEM is, and in
Hmm.
so many ways, STEM fields connect with, the social sciences and so forth. Um, we've got these intersections of like STEM with economics, STEM with like psychology, STEM with, the practice of how we do science, the ethics of computing and so forth. And so across that, there's a wide range of things that are, yeah, definitely STEM, intro to those subjects, but also these like adjacencies that are really rich and vibrant.
I thought I'd share maybe two of my favorite offerings that we have on OpenCourseWare, especially for people exploring STEM maybe for the first time. And some of them are pretty advanced, but that doesn't mean you can't take a peek and find something interesting to hook onto. One Curt mentioned is the social and ethical responsibilities of computing. We have a page that points to so many case studies that look at like the ethical implications of what we're doing with computing that are just super fascinating. They're all openly licensed, so anybody can go in and adapt those for their own needs. You can retain them, keep them, download them. They're amazing. They have really interesting case studies on like the use of age progression software and like what that means, and explainer things around AI. So like definitely encourage people to take a look at that. And then I also love what we call 9.401, which is tools for robust science. Rebecca Sachs is in cognitive and neurosciences, and she's the instructor. And she like helps students look at how to make science more robust and easier to replicate, and just how we can create better science. So it's great if you're interested in this field to start looking at what actual scientists are actively thinking about and grappling with.
Those are great recommendations. And I didn't even have to ask that question. What would you recommend to people to start off looking into? So thank you for that. And Curt, I'm curious if you have anything that you might recommend for someone who, hears this episode, discovers MIT OpenCourseWare, and just wants to start digging into some STEM courses.
The introduction to programming classes are actually really rich and impactful, as opposed to just like learning how to program. These courses are teaching a sort of a deeper way of like how to approach computational thinking, and then
Mm-hmm.
put programming and these technologies in the service of that. So, of course, like our latest version of that introductory subject, that's the number 6.100L, Introduction to Computer Science and Programming in Python by Annabelle, just does a wonderful job of walking through that. Its videos are also available with high quality translations into Spanish for the video captions
Oh,
to
cool.
expand the reach of this stuff, because we recognize that's a really important topic. One other that I would lift up, and this is actually our most viewed video on YouTube, is it's a 1-hour seminar taught by the late Patrick Winston, who's a leading artificial intelligence researcher. For many years, he taught this seminar, How to Speak, and it's kind of a master class in how to give a presentation that engages people. And I think everyone, including people working the STEM fields, it's really important to be able to like communicate what you're doing, why it matters to you, what its impact
Definitely.
are. And that's a wonderful introduction into another sort of aspect of what we do on OpenCourseWare.
Cool. I love
Yeah.
all of these recommendations, and I definitely could have used that intro to programming in grad school instead of trying to teach myself and frustrating myself through YouTube videos, but maybe I'll still be able to check it out.
Yeah, never too late.
Yeah, never too late. Can we talk about the global reach that MIT OpenCourseWare has, and how technologies and tools like auto translation are helping to extend that reach even further?
One of my favorite subjects. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, there are a number of, I'd say, surprises thinking back at the early days of OpenCourseWare and what we've discovered. One of them is just how incredibly global the reach of this project is. At this point, and for quite a while, really, about 70% of the traffic to our website and YouTube channel is coming from outside the United States. And and if you realize that just about everything we have in OpenCourseWare is also in the English language, that global reach is even more sort of, I think, amazing. I mean, we're thrilled to have that, that expanse,
Hmm.
the reach around the world. But, also recognize how much more it could be if we were able to, say, translate into languages besides English. I mentioned that intro to programming computational thinking class, we've translated the captions into Spanish.
Hmm.
But at this point, there's actually a fairly small number of OCW materials that have translations into other languages. In our earlier days, roughly like 2005 to 15, give or take, we had a number of formal translation partnerships with different organizations around the world. We had about, I think, 10 different languages that people were translating stuff into. But that was pre AI. Those were
Hmm.
hand done translations. And um, that's very hard to sustain. That's a lot of effort. And over time, each of those programs just realized they couldn't kind of keep it up, and they've fallen apart. But it really does seem like we're now at the cusp, at a tipping point with new machine driven, AI driven translation tools to open that back up. Um, a couple of years ago, we started testing on a kind of pilot basis a service that Google was developing in their labs called Google Aloud, and there are a few courses that we have um, not only sort of translated captions, but synthesized voice, dubbed audio, and the Patrick Winston How to Speak is an example of a resource that we put through that program, and so you can hear Patrick speak in English, and then you can hear a completely different synthesized voice speak what Patrick was saying in
Hmm.
Spanish and Portuguese.
Cool.
Um, so it kind of indicated the possibility of what can be there. So Google, YouTube, they're now kind of like extending and evolving what was that pilot, and we look forward to being able to continue to participate in that. But in the meantime, I want to also lift up something we've been doing the last few months with a very devoted group of Ukrainian learners, coming out of some MIT students who are from Ukraine. Um, and they've used kind of the current generation, like the latest generation of these tools to translate, a set of courses they think would be most useful to their learners into Ukrainian. And they figured out some really clever ways to, um, take that last few percent of accuracy and create a glossary that's trusted,
Hmm.
translate this word for linear algebra in English to this exact right, detailed word in Ukrainian. And so they've been experimenting with that and sharing the results with us. Again, this is a example of what you can do with openly licensed materials. So we're thrilled to have this sort of collaboration again. And so it really feels like you know, we're we're about to transition into a world where there's a much wider set of translated materials for everyone. So it's really exciting to see this taking shape.
Yeah, that does sound exciting to know that the mission with MIT OpenCourseWare to begin with was to make education more accessible, and now there's tools that can further that mission. So I'm really glad to hear that MIT OpenCourseWare is making use of those and helping to make these materials even more accessible than they already were.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to emphasize how great it is to be able to collaborate with others.
Hmm.
There's a lot of languages in the world, right?
Yeah.
And, the tools will get you again, like 95% of the way. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to think about how we approach that sort of like fine tuning, at scale across as many languages as we can. Um,
Yeah.
I look forward to putting a call out at some point for help from the world.
Cool. It's cool to hear some of the innovative thinking that people at MIT OpenCourseWare have used to enhance this program, if you will. And I'm curious if you have any similar success stories that you know of, or anything that stands out to you from the people who use MIT OpenCourseWare. So maybe someone who has used MIT OpenCourseWare to pivot into a new career or to achieve something remarkable. Anything that stands out to you that you'd be able to share with us today?
Yeah, I can speak to this. Learner stories are like our favorite thing at OpenCourseWare. Sometimes we post them up on a bulletin board, we share them around on our Slack channel, sometimes we email them to each other. They're like I don't know, little pockets of joy for us that fuel our work. I can tell you about one person. His name is Michael Jordan Pilgreen. He is an artist by training, and during COVID, his art career opportunities dried up a little bit. And so he began to use MIT OpenCourseWare to study finance. And he essentially like pivoted his career. He learned a lot through the open educational materials on OpenCourseWare, listening to lectures, watching videos. And then he took advantage of other MIT open learning pathways, like MITx courses and MicroMasters. There are just so many. And he got a job with a finance company, and it just completely changed his path. So he changed his own life in a pretty incredible way. And luckily for us, he's still painting and doing art. So now it's art plus finance, not one or the other, which is great. But he met another person, Emmanuel Kazagazi from Uganda, who also began using OpenCourseWare to expand his worldview. He sort of used it to unlock coding for himself and to like do deep dives into psychology. And it's just sort of like fueling his whole life and interests. And so these two people met each other, and they proposed an idea to us at MIT OpenCourseWare to host like a special season of Chalk Radio, which we called the Open Learners Podcast. And they actually interviewed learners from around the world who are using OpenCourseWare to change their lives.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
cool.
yeah, we can put it in your show notes, but we have like 6 episodes featuring people from different continents, all using this one resource to create change. And one of my favorite ones, her name is Sujud Elduma. She's originally from Sudan, and she used OpenCourseWare during her undergraduate studies to supplement what she was learning. And then she also took advantage of other pathways within MIT Open Learning. She did emerging talent and others. And now she's sort of poised for a career in data science. And she would like to take everything that she has learned back to help rebuild Sudan when that's possible. So, I mean, if that's not an inspiring story, I
Yeah.
don't know what is. So every day we sort of remind ourselves of these learners doing really inspirational things with MIT OpenCourseWare materials, and it just helps us keep doing our work and helps like inspire us to keep democratizing knowledge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I agree. They are very inspiring, and I'm really happy to hear how MIT OpenCourseWare is changing sort of the landscape, if you will, of online education. And I'm curious what you think MIT OpenCourseWare's role is in shaping the future of education. And we've talked about this a little bit, but how new technologies might be changing the way that MIT OpenCourseWare is delivered and engaged with by learners.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think of us, in some ways, trying to shape the future, but also responding to and being prepared for other things that come at us. Um, the experience of how things shifted during the COVID pandemic, the lockdowns, the disruptions in people's, educations broadly, we were really lucky to have had invested in producing these libraries of materials and have them online. You know, um, the use of our materials during, especially those first few months of the COVID shutdown, we like doubled the amount of traffic that we were getting, and it really sort of hit home for us, like the role, for instance, of these materials for any disruption that a learner faces in their educational journey. So the story that Sarah, you were just describing about, Jude and Michael Jordan Pilgreen, and we might like to think that most people follow a pretty straightforward, clean path in their education. They go to school, they finish, they get a job. A lot of people's lives are not that way, and quite frankly, you know, we're increasingly living in a world where we really need to support people for lifelong learning. The work that I do at OpenCourseWare is not what I went to school for at all. you know, um, and I think that's increasingly the world that we need to be preparing for. So we like to think about, you know, how do we serve the need for like true lifelong K to gray learning, K being kindergarten, and showing up for that. And, and then from that sort of broader fame, being ready to say incorporate shifts of things like artificial intelligence and how that shifts people's, you know, relationship with how they search for, discover, and think through knowledge.
Mhm.
We're working, intensively with all of that kind of stuff.
Nice. And something I just realized we didn't really get into that you kind of just touched on is how did you end up at MIT OpenCourseWare, both of you? You said that this is not what you went to school for. So I'm curious, what are your backgrounds and how did you find yourself doing what it is that you do now?
Oh, yeah, I never thought I would end up at MIT or MIT OpenCourseWare. So I am a teacher and an anthropologist by training. I taught elementary school and then I taught teachers how to be teachers. Um, and I saw the job opening at MIT OpenCourseWare and I was like, well, I don't have a science and math background. Like, I'll never get this job. But I know teaching, and that's what they wanted. They wanted someone who could talk with faculty across disciplines about how they teach with the materials that they then later share on MIT OpenCourseWare. So I ended up with like the best job in the world where like my whole job is to talk with people about how they teach and to record those interviews and to share it with people. So it's worked out really, really well. And I will have to say that there's something in the air at MIT and in the interwebs on MIT OpenCourseWare that is truly contagious. Like now I really like honestly believe I can get into programming. I could even attack quantum physics if I wanted to. Like there is just something about MIT that makes you believe you can. And so I hope that everybody listening out there like bets on themselves and checks out these resources and begins to believe the same thing about themselves.
We are so grateful to have Sarah on the team. It's been great. Yeah. So my school background, I studied electrical engineering. Actually worked for about 12 years in the field. I was really into communication systems. I worked for Bell Labs on like optical networking and internet routing and stuff. Um, and around that year 2000, as the internet was going through its, growing pains, I was working for a startup company, and it went out of business. And I was like, I want to do something different.
Mhm.
Living in the Boston area, I was like trying to do like technical writing and writing for magazines and um, was orbiting around MIT around the time OpenCourseWare was launched. And it was fun being a freelancer for a couple of years. I was like, I would like a job. And this sounds really cool. And I was just so lucky to be there, at the time it was just getting off the ground. And so I've stayed, and it definitely helps, I'd say, to have that engineering background, to like talk maybe and build a little bit more trust with people who have that way of thinking,
Mhm.
around the campus. But I'd say I draw just as much on the fact that I'm a improvising jazz drummer as I do on that engineering background and trying to make this work happen. You know, how do we navigate changing uncertain spaces? I not sure I have the words for it, but I can like make some music about it to
Yeah.
start. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you both found your way to MIT OpenCourseWare, and it sounds like you've had a really great and inspiring time since you've been there, and we're looking forward to hearing what else comes out of MIT OpenCourseWare in the future. And you mentioned that you are all focused on shaping the future of education, but also responding to what's going on and changing technologies. And something that we actually get into with a lot of our guests, just given how things go today, is AI. So we talked a bit about the auto translation, but could you tell us more about how, or if and how MIT OpenCourseWare is using AI, or sees that as a technology fitting into how MIT OpenCourseWare operates, or maybe how learners use your material?
One thing I'll acknowledge is, in some ways how early days we are with this. Sarah, you've been
Hmm.
leading a program recently that's like pulling together some thought leadership from around the open education space. Right? You know, there's themes that are coming up there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just started an AI and open education initiative at MIT Open Learning where we solicited papers from authors around the world about the intersection of artificial intelligence and open education in particular. So we gained a lot of insights from those papers, and they pointed to things like the judicious use of AI and like what is it doing to our climate and how can we leverage open to reduce the climate impact of AI. So that's fascinating. Um, Another paper looks at how to leverage AI to evaluate AI generated materials. So for quality and safety,
Mhm.
and those models are trained on open educational resources. So there's a lot of interesting work. But one of the most interesting things was that it was actually difficult to find papers on
Mhm.
exactly this intersection. So I think in the future, we're going to have to be really carefully attending to how AI complicates and maybe accelerates open and vice versa. I don't think it's like a very clean cut answer.
If I could, pick up on a couple things and, you know, be a little bit predictive without being very specific, you know, it's clear to me that these tools will shift the way that people discover information. You
Mhm.
know, it's going to transform how we like ask a question of the world of knowledge and get answers to it. Um, but also how we sort of plot our path forward, and especially the many millions of people around the world who use OpenCourseWare who are kind of self-directed. That can be a very challenging thing to do. Figure out where do I start and what among the next things that I study might that be. Um, I look forward to some of these tools helping us with that. You know, um, 'Cause it's very hard to do on a sort of a manual librarian style,
Yeah.
recommendation. There's only so much of that can go around.
Mhm.
I think those tools will help. They'll also change some things, and so we'll have to adapt to that.
Yeah. Guess we'll have to stay tuned and see
Yeah,
see how things go.
yeah,
And for anyone who is listening today, honestly, myself included, who now wants to check out MIT OpenCourseWare and take a class, how does that work for someone who is starting from the beginning, who has never taken an MIT OpenCourseWare course or program before? Where should they start and what can they expect?
yeah. Well, we like to emphasize that, you know, knowledge is your reward for working with OpenCourseWare. It's wide open for you to pick and choose however you wish. Um, you can go to the OpenCourseWare site and, for instance, do a sort of search or browse by a specific topic that's interested in. Um, if you're just, more broadly curious, just land on the homepage at ocw.mit.edu and you can, see, and we kind of rotate these through. Here's 12 featured courses from across the collection that we think are kind of interesting, and you can check those out. Um, if you're specifically interested in a particular topic, say, really, really diving in on environment and sustainability concerns, you can look at, for instance, a collection that we've built around a handful of these topics, and tried to like curate. Here's a shorter list out of the 2,500 courses that we've got on OCW. Here's 30 or 50 or 100. That you can kind of winnow your way through. That would be one way to start.
I'll just add that OpenCourseWare is a lot like visiting the Grand Canyon.
Hmm.
It's vast and it's very much choose your own adventure. There aren't necessarily clearly demarcated paths for you to take, but that's also kind of the awesome part of like going on this adventure. You might jump from one thing to the next and like really discover beautiful vantage points or treasures along the way. Um, and you never know when you're going to find that one thing that makes you go like, oh yeah, everything makes sense. Or, oh yeah, I want to study this now. So like we encourage you to do that and to like share those stories with us because that's what really keeps us going.
Yeah, I hope everybody listening takes advantage of what it sounds like is a great resource in MIT OpenCourseWare. And as I've mentioned a couple times, I'm personally very interested in this now, so I'll be sure to check it out and see. Maybe I'll start with those featured courses and see what to look at. And I'm really looking forward to getting to explore this more, and I hope that our audience is too. And that brings us to our final question, which is something that we get to ask all of our guests who come on Go for Launch. And I'll ask this to each of you. And that's going to be, what is something that you are just deeply curious about? Something that you think about all the time. And this can be related to your work or related to anything else in the world.
You go
Sarah, you
first.
want
You go first, Curt. You have big thoughts on this.
Well, for a number of years, the thing that's been driving me most deeply and personally is um, just trying to think about, you know, what some people describe as like the poly crisis of climate change and all of its intersecting things. You can look at it as the poly crisis, also the poly opportunity, if you can project forward into, you know, thinking about the future in new ways,
Hmm.
and people might find it hard, and I think that's a symptom of the situation we're living in, to like imagine futures that are better. What are the opportunities that we have there? I think like what we do at OpenCourseWare, sharing knowledge and trying to build community around that is a really important contributor to it, but in no way like the whole picture. And so much of what I hope this opens up into is not just like thinking about, like solutions and specific things, but also, there's I think some resets and repairs in like our relationships with each other. And that's not just human to human, but also, with our non-human relatives around the planet as well. So that's the big thing that's driving me, that I think about all the time.
Yeah, and similarly, I think a lot about relationships between people and how fostering good relationships can really sustain the work in open, and the work in climate and all these hard things that we have to do. I think it really starts with feeling safe and good with each other. Um, and through my relationships with people in the open ecosystem, I've been learning a lot more about indigenous knowledges and how they intersect with open education, and how some knowledges perhaps should not be open and need to be kept sacred and only for certain people. So it's just opening up a new way of like thinking about all of this. And so I'm like deeply curious about it, and interested to see how that will play out in the open landscape. And I'm looking forward to what I can learn about.
Well, thank you both for sharing. Those are some interesting things, and I'm glad someone out there is thinking about them. And before we wrap up, I just want to see if there's any one last thing you'd like our listeners to take away with them, or any last bit of advice or information that you want to send everyone home with.
I will just say that MIT is like a big place, a prestigious place, but underneath it all, it's a very kind place. Like all the faculty we work with like volunteer to put their content out there to the world. I've interviewed so many of them. They always like are very generous with their time. They're patient. They like love to hear how people are using their materials. So like underneath the facade of prestige, like it's just like a deeply human, wonderfully nerdy, caring, like great place. So I hope everybody can tap into that energy through MIT OpenCourseWare and other offerings that MIT Open Learning has.
Appreciate that, Sarah. What a what an interesting time to be alive this is, and things may feel uncertain and changing, and um, you know, um, we just hope that what we're doing at OpenCourseWare and with all our colleagues who are working on open knowledge more broadly just could be a contributor to empowering people to again imagine those futures and work towards them.
Yeah, thank you both again for sharing, and thanks for your time today. It's been wonderful having this discussion with you, Sarah and Curt, and we look forward to chatting with you again in the future. So thank you, and bye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Audrey.